I'm your host for the day, Noah Cook, and welcome to the Film Format Podcast. Today, we will look throughout the entire history of the film and movie industry to give you the best understanding of how film and their different respective formats have evolved as technology advanced and dramatically changed the industry over time. The reason I decided to create this podcast is because ever since I was a kid, I have always just been into collecting cameras. And if you know anything about cameras, especially video cameras, not every single one of them runs on the same type of format. Older ones can run on film like 8mm, or if you happen to dig in grandma's closet, you can find one of her old VHS cameras. So to sum it up, I just really like messing around with every single type of video camera, which eventually that inspired me to become a film production major. So overall, I felt that doing a podcast on something I was passionate about would be a really good idea. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, the story of motion picture film as we know it all started with a man named Edward Munbridge in the 1870s. He was an avid photographer during that period, but photography didn't satisfy him enough. So he began to run what he called experiments with his picture camera, where he would use a series of multiple cameras to try and capture a sequential image of humans or maybe farm animals. His most famous example was said to be that of a horse galloping around in a field. Munbridge demonstrated the subject of motion photography, which then set the stage for all other motion picture pioneers, and that's how eventually the film genre began. So then later in the 19th century, Thomas Edison and his assistant William Kennedy Laurie Dixon developed the kinetoscope. This was the device that was used to view 35mm film slides. You looked into the machine sort of like you would a pair of binoculars, and the film ran left to right in a stop motion. Without this invention, the modern day projector would not have existed. Silent short films then first started to arise in the 1890s due to their invention of flexible film in 1885, created by no other than George Eastman. He was the founder of Kodak. Then 10 years went by and the Lumiere brothers invented the so-called cinematograph. It was a combination of a camera and a projector. This then allowed for film to be developed and screened for entertainment purposes. This had a big impact on the popularization of film as a format of entertainment for pretty much anybody. And things started going around. People would tell each other about different movies they saw, and that was created the silent era. So now let's transition a little bit and talk about the rise of the so-called silent era of film. More technological developments in the late 19th and early 20th century led to improvements in motion picture screenings, better film stocks, and standardization of the 35mm format encouraged different filmmakers to capture more detailed and interesting scenes, thus leading to projection technology improving as well. Soon enough theaters and venue screenings of silent films they then started to expand throughout the world. Films also started to get quite longer than the ones previously, leading filmmakers and writers to get more character development out of their story. Overall, the plot and the narratives of these new films began to get more interesting to the general public. With more demand growing for these films, companies like MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, and other ones led to the birth as what we now know as Hollywood. So as time went on, the visual aesthetic of silent films didn't cut it from some people. Then, the release of a film called The Jazz Singer in 1927, directed by Alan Crosland, was the first full-length feature film to have sound recorded on set during production. Its stunning transition from musical to then dialogue scenes must have been a spectacle for those to see back then. But for theaters to play these new types of sounds, films that they basically had to adapt a certain type of projector, which was called a photophone. It was a modified projector that played a special reel of 35mm film. It also had a small line of magnetic tape below the film, which then ran through the projector also and displayed the sound. So this eliminated the need for other external sound equipment like reel-to-reel audio players. However, the sound era also faced its fair set of challenges. speakers weren't as good back then, so they had really clean audio recording devices, but speakers and audio, I guess, producing devices or hearing devices weren't as good. Also, actors from the silent era really struggled to adapt to the production standards and how things were done on the set of sound films. Technicolor was one of the big advancements in the film technology during the 1930s. This paved the way for films like Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind. It just added a new aspect of realism that people could see films the way they saw the world in color. Uh, Even though 35 millimeter was usually the standard film of choice for many movies, eventually the popularization of 70 millimeter and larger formats also became a good option for sound films, and it also offered a larger projection ratio, and it also just had more image definition overall because it was just simply bigger than 35 millimeter film. So overall, I think film in general just has to be my favorite type of format when it comes to just video in general. Because if it wasn't for film to begin with, we wouldn't have any sort of digital formats or anything such as that. So if it wasn't for today's episode, we wouldn't have any more episodes in the future, in my opinion. I also think that is just the most aesthetically pleasing formats. There's just something about doing things the old analog way, and just there's an entire process when it comes to shooting film and then developing it, scanning it, and correcting it, post everything. So I think it just makes something uh, really special. And I eventually, as a film production major, hope to shoot on actual film someday. I'd really like to make an actual movie or some sort of production that was done on 35 millimeter film. I think that'd be great. And even today, modernly, about still a decent bit of the movies that come out are still shot on film. Digital cinema cameras have really improved within the past 20 or 10 years, but a lot of production companies and even some directors just have that. Film has that aesthetic and stylistic look to it. They just prefer that over some of the others. Well, if you're still listening in, thank you. This was our first episode of the Film Format Podcast. I'm Noah Cook again. Make sure you tune in to our next episode as well. We're going to be taking a look at a different format called videotapes, and we'll be going through the various types that exist within that spectrum of video. So, thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye for now.